In a small, quiet village, there lived a poor farmer named Ruto. He had a modest piece of land that he worked day and night to make ends meet. Though his life was hard, Ruto was known for his honesty and kindness, always willing to help anyone in need. Despite his struggles, he dreamed of one day improving his life and the lives of those around him. One day, while plowing his fields, Ruto heard a rumor that the king was coming to their village. The king, so the story went, was known to reward those who impressed him with great riches. This news excited Ruto, but also filled him with doubt. How could a poor farmer like him ever impress the mighty king? The day arrived when the king and his entourage came to the village. People from all over the area gathered to greet him, hoping for a chance to speak to the ruler. As Ruto stood among the crowd, he wondered how he could catch the king's attention and possibly win a reward. He thought of the many ways he had been wronged by the rich and powerful, and for the first time, an idea began to form in his mind. Ruto decided that instead of trying to impress the king with his work or his land, he would use his wit. After all, the king was powerful, but Ruto knew that even the mighty could be fooled with a clever trick. Ruto went home that evening and began to prepare for the king's visit the next day. He didn't have much to work with, but he used what little he had. He gathered some old clothes, a small sack of grain, and a few other humble items. His plan was simple: he would pretend to be a rich merchant offering a grand gift to the king. The next morning, Ruto dressed in his makeshift costume and went to the village square. He stood in line with the other villagers, nervously clutching his sack. He knew that if he could convince the king of his wealth, he might just be able to trick him into giving him a reward. As the king made his way through the village, he stopped to talk to the villagers. One by one, people presented their offerings or begged for mercy. When the king reached Ruto, the poor farmer stood tall, his head held high. With a confident voice, he declared, "Your Majesty, I bring you a gift like no other, a treasure that will make you wealthier than all the kingdoms combined." The king raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the farmer's boldness. "What is this treasure, farmer?" he asked, curious. Ruto opened his sack, revealing nothing but a small bag of grain. The king's face twisted with confusion, unsure whether to laugh or grow angry. Seeing the king's confusion, Ruto quickly added, "This grain, sire, is no ordinary grain. It is magical. Just one handful of it can turn into enough gold to fill a palace. A single grain can change your life forever." The king, taken aback, asked, "Are you sure? This grain looks so simple. How can something so small be so powerful?" Ruto nodded with complete confidence. "I have heard of many great kings and emperors who have tried to use this magical grain, but only the wisest have been able to make it work. The secret is in how you treat it." Intrigued by the idea of magical wealth, the king decided to play along. The king, eager to see if the farmer was truly as clever as he claimed, decided to take the grain. "Very well, I will give you a chance. You will be rewarded if you can prove your words," he said. Ruto smiled and bowed low, accepting the king's challenge. He knew he had the king's attention now. As the king walked away with the sack of grain, Ruto returned to his humble home, his heart pounding with excitement. He was no longer just a poor farmer. In that moment, he was a man who had tricked the king into believing in his tale. But Ruto wasn't done yet. He had one more part of his plan to execute. A week later, the king summoned Ruto to his palace. The farmer arrived, confident that his plan had worked. The king stood before him, his arms crossed, and a curious expression on his face. "You said that grain would turn to gold," the king began. "But all I found was more grain." Ruto bowed his head, trying not to laugh. "Ah, Your Majesty, the magic of the grain is not in what you see. The true power lies in how you use it. You must plant it, and then wait for the harvest." The king, still skeptical but intrigued, agreed to follow the farmer's advice. Ruto led the king to a small patch of land near the palace. There, the farmer showed him how to plant the grain, explaining that patience was key. "You must care for it every day, Your Majesty, and in time, it will reward you." The king, though unsure, decided to give it a try. He left the grain in the hands of his workers and waited. Days passed, and Ruto returned to the village, keeping an eye on the palace. He knew the king would be watching for a change, but the truth was, nothing would happen. The grain was just ordinary, and Ruto had planned it that way. All he needed was time. After several weeks of tending to the land, the king grew impatient. No gold appeared from the grain, and his workers started to question the farmer's claims. "Your Majesty," one of the workers said, "there is no treasure here. This was a trick." But the king refused to believe that he had been fooled. Instead, he called Ruto back to the palace. "You promised me riches, farmer, but all I have is grain in the ground," the king said, his voice filled with frustration. Ruto, ever calm and composed, answered, "Sire, the gold is not just in the grain itself. It is in your heart. The true treasure lies in your ability to be patient, to trust in the process, and to care for those who serve you. The gold you seek is not material, it is the wisdom you gain from the journey." The king was quiet, his mind turning over Ruto's words. For the first time, he realized that perhaps the farmer was not trying to trick him. Instead, Ruto had taught him a valuable lesson about patience, trust, and the importance of not rushing to judgment. The king, now understanding the deeper meaning of Ruto's words, decided to reward the farmer not with gold, but with something more valuable, his trust. "You are a wise man, Ruto. You have taught me a lesson I will never forget. I had hoped for riches, but I have found wisdom instead." The king declared that Ruto would be given a piece of land and enough resources to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Ruto bowed, grateful for the king's generosity. However, he knew that the true reward was not in the land or the riches, it was in the king's newfound understanding. With the king's reward, Ruto's life began to improve. He was no longer just a poor farmer, but a man who had earned the respect of the most powerful ruler in the land. He continued to live simply, sharing his wisdom with others and helping those in need. His reputation as a wise and humble man spread far and wide. Ruto's life was transformed, but he never forgot the lesson he had taught the king. He continued to live with patience, kindness, and honesty, always reminding himself that true wealth lay in the heart, not in material possessions. As for the king, he had changed as well. The trick that Ruto had played on him had opened his eyes to the importance of wisdom over wealth. He ruled with more care and thoughtfulness, treating his people with greater respect and ensuring that his decisions benefited everyone, not just the rich. The king often sought Ruto's advice, valuing his counsel above all others. Together, they worked to improve the kingdom, focusing on fairness and justice. The bond between the farmer and the king grew stronger, built on mutual respect and understanding. Years passed, and Ruto's story became a legend in the kingdom. People would tell tales of the poor farmer who had tricked the king into finding wisdom, and how that wisdom had transformed a kingdom. Ruto's legacy lived on, not in wealth, but in the lessons he had taught to everyone he met. His simple life, filled with kindness and honesty, became a beacon for others to follow. The kingdom flourished, and the people remembered that true greatness came not from gold or power, but from the strength of character and the ability to learn and grow. The story's moral is that wisdom and patience are far more valuable than wealth or power. While riches may come and go, the lessons we learn and the kindness we show others last a lifetime.